wesn.
It's budget day, but before we get to the budget, there is something I wanted to highlight. Maybe it's not necessarily more important than the budget, but I think what it entails or contains might be, in many ways, more important than the budget, depending on your point of view. Yesterday, I believe it would have been the Sunday edition of the Newsday, Debbie Jacob, someone who has done quite a bit for those incarcerated with regards to helping, maybe not all prisoners, but she has put effort in to assisting the rehabilitation of at least some prisoners, and has done so rather successfully, at least in some cases. I know of someone related to one of the individuals who, well, I mean, he was a correct criminal from my understanding, and now he's not. And she had an article in yesterday's Newsday, as I started off saying, speaking to a young lady who ended up in that gang life. One of the things that we don't necessarily think about are young girls in gangs. That has become part of the narrative recently, but generally a few months ago, while it's not as though anybody would have said, well, girls can't be in gangs because they're girls, no one would have necessarily outright said that. But if you thought of a gang member, you're not going to think of young ladies. You're going to think of guys. Regardless, her experience both is telling for what girls in a life of crime go through, but then also what people in general in a life of crime goes through, and what might cause you to end up there. Debbie Jacobs' article has some interesting tidbits, testimony from the young lady herself, whose name has been kept anonymous. A fake name was used to refer to her in the article in order to keep her safe. Speaking about her home life and how it actually was better at times when she was incarcerated. How apparently even the police picked up on it and tried to help her as much as they could. She spoke about actually being in a gang and the risks to her life, acknowledging the fact that a gang member could have shot at the police and she could have been caught in the crossfire, and that would have been it. Acknowledging the fact that because she had issues with her family life, she was looking for something. And she thought she had it in the gang until she's locked up. She can't really do anything for anybody. She doesn't have anything to offer. There's nothing she could give them or grant them. So all of a sudden, she's no longer a priority. She acknowledged that one of her issues was the level of violence that some gangs would commit that was senseless to her. But one of the most stark observations is not by the interview subject, but rather by the interviewer herself. Debbie Jacobs closes the article saying, if you see her, she looks like a typical teenager on her way to school. Or if you hear the excitement in her voice and listen to her dreams, you would never guess she once belonged to a gang. I think one of the reasons why, in many cases, it's easy for the family, for the friends, and for the neighborhood to try to cover for their young men and, to some extent, their young women who get caught up in this life is because, technically speaking, many of them did not have to be in it. Many of them are not outright evil, but rather they get faced with a crossroads in life. And there may be circumstances or external forces that are pushing them, shoving them, forcing them down a path. And then the question is, will they take the easy way out? And that is to say, accept, quote unquote, fate. That is to say, what cards they have been dealt with, will they proceed to play the game based on that? Or will they take the tough decision to try to find a way to walk away from the game? But you see, you can't necessarily walk away from life, and that's what makes it hard. I do wonder, as to some extent brutal the account of the snippets of her life, the window to her life that she gave us, I do wonder to what extent, how true it is for far too many young men and women in TNT. And to be honest, she was essentially saved, or her life turned around, being incarcerated. We don't necessarily have a lot of hope for rehabilitation with our criminal element. Although the work that's done there has had some success stories, to what extent is that the average? To what extent is that the exception? But then it goes to show that at least in this case, there were so many things working against this young lady until she reached prison. And ironically, it got her out of some of the toxic environments that she was in. Like I said, her accounts describe a hard family life, and then things weren't always easy being in a gang, but then also being a young lady in a gang. And part of it was just getting her out of that environment, because she didn't necessarily agree with the violence. And to what extent is it not so much that the young men want to be violent, but they just get exposed and desensitized to it so much, and then the need to utilize violence to defend themselves, to defend their territory, to enforce their will so that no one enforces their own will on them. A vicious cycle that, granted, I'm not saying we need to excuse them. Someone who might have committed a murder, we should all of a sudden, sing Kumbaya and try to make excuses and all of that. But there is something to be said when it seems as though, as bad as our prison rehabilitation systems might be results-wise, and it's an uphill battle, don't get me wrong, I do wonder if, in her case, one of the lessons taken out of it was potentially, I can't say this for sure because she did not necessarily relate the entirety of her life in full detail of what did or did not happen, but it does seem as though, outside of some of the police officers kind of catching wind of what was going on, potentially, that's what it's implied, not necessarily outright said, but we'll go with the implication. Outside of that, doesn't seem to have a lot of systems within society to try to help this young lady not fall through the cracks. But at the end of the day, her last line, I think, sums it up very beautifully. I believe people can change. They just need a chance and a family to love them. Now, fortunately, her father apparently is a positive figure in her life, and there are other people hopefully able to encourage her, to guide her, to mentor her. She has dreams for the future, and we should be grateful for that. Even if it's just her getting herself out of a life of crime, we should all be grateful for each and every one who's able to find a new path out of that. Of course, the question is, to what extent are we going to expect the state to do all of these things for us, and to what extent will we start to think about how we could contribute to this ourselves? I'm not entirely sure what the answer to that question should be, particularly now when it's not necessarily safe to try to intervene. In fact, too many articles, and maybe the details are wrong and we are being misled, but until we get evidence that says otherwise, it seems as though there are too many people who are victims of gang violence, not because they want to be involved or because they want to interfere in gang activities, but because they themselves don't want to be involved. They don't want to be a part of it at all. Or maybe they may have spoken up for somebody that would have encouraged people to stay out, and that might be viewed as interference. I don't know. But I fear that we've gone past the normal point of safety nets to catch people before they fall into a life of crime, rehabilitation to help them get out. We've gone beyond that. We have that stage now where the violence seems to be almost born of a sense of untouchability, and that being the case, if you're not going to join us, then you're our enemy, so we'll have to deal with you. That's a mentality that you see. I guess you could, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's a mentality that you see in gangs when the crime situation has gone to a certain point, when they feel to some extent they are potentially untouchable, that they know how to maneuver in the system, and therefore it's a lot easier for them to get away with things, not just threats, but outright killings, not for reprisals of anyone harming them, but rather reprisals for being rejected. I think, to some extent, when you listen to this budget, you need to be keenly aware there is a divide. And normally I'm not one to care about the divide between rich and poor, because the criticism says that the gap is widening. I don't care if the gap is widening. What I care about is if the people at the bottom end of this gap, they themselves are not progressing. Everybody could progress and the gap could widen. But it's when the gap widens because the people at the lower economic brackets are having a harder and harder time of it, are having a reduced standard of living, are getting further and deeper into poverty. When the gap widens because of that, then we have a problem. And I do wonder, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, to what extent is there an out of sight, out of mind insulation? A lot of expensive cars on your road, a lot of new expensive cars on your road. And to some extent that could be because people had to delay their major life choices because of COVID. Everything was put on pause. Maybe it was time to replace your car and you didn't do it quite yet because of all of what happened, and we had a glut of new cars on your road for whatever reason in the last year. A lot of foreign exchange went out the door to make that happen. But at the end of the day, we don't make cars here. But now more than ever, it's a hell of a thing where potentially the amount of real estate where a certain cross-section of the population will never go to because they won't feel safe driving there in their Mercedes or their BMWs or whatever. I think that's growing. And then, to what extent will that divide us even more successfully than the racial politics? And to what extent is that feeding this? Situations that lead to young people falling through the nets and joining gangs. So when you listen to the budget, maybe you should try to find Debbie Jacobs' article in yesterday's Newsday, or look for it online, it's online. Read the account and understand this budget is more than just you getting your tax break or your grant or your subsidy. There's a lot involved, there's a lot at play, there's a lot at stake. It's all ultimately connected because we are a country, we are a society, we affect each other. But we'll have to wait and see like the rest of us. All right, let's. Sean Michael Smallhead, this is Talking Point on WESND Content Capital. No ASP today, unfortunately, couldn't make it. And the TTPS corporate comms couldn't get us a replacement in time. However, the show must go on. But we'll take a break right now. When we come back, we'll get into the specific topics of the day. A lot of it is going to be around the budget or the economy. Something interesting happened last week. Am I interesting? I think it's bad news. Government might try to say it's not, but I don't know if I'll buy that. But we'll get to that and more after this. Stay tuned.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus. Quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
Budget day. And to what extent is this going to be a big one? Ironically, what might make it even bigger is if we have a change in government, and then to some extent, depending on when the election falls, you may or may not have a different administration trying to work within the confines of the previous administration budget. It's one of those things where I do wonder if part of constitutional reform should kind of clear this up a little bit with regards to how the budget works and elections. I do wonder if it would actually be good for say, the final year of an administration, they don't do a budget for the following year, but rather elections happens, toot sweet, and we get the new administration to kind of set a budget, or we get maybe an interim budget, a placeholder budget. I don't know. Of course, you know, there are a lot of people who say, what are you talking about? The PNM going to win again? I'm not confident either way, despite, I have recently heard a case last week that the PNM should be concerned, but the election is the next thing. But the current thing, that's the budget. So to get into the stories, let's kick off today's Daily Review. And of course, one of the things that we spoke about last week, particularly last week Friday, is with regards to, is this going to be an election budget? Election budget, election goodies, generally, as it was described by one economist, is that they're not going to put the population onto any more strain. And potentially, also I think this is where you should see more money for road paving and things like that. Because unfortunately, so I can't necessarily fault the politicians for this completely, but voters tend to forget if you did things for them a couple of years ago. What goes into the population's perception of this government is working for us is very strange. And I myself don't necessarily understand it fully. I do think, though, to some extent, it is a fault of the poor communication efforts or the poor communication channels, I guess you could say, because this happens in the private sector as well. Not enough is done to figure out a way to kind of, when information needs to be disseminated in the population, that's important. Not enough is done to get it there. But this isn't just government services. To some extent, it's also the private sector, to some extent. And I find, particularly with certain programs, NGOs, with their non-profit programs and their charitable programs, as well as certain businesses and their, I guess you could say, organization, the changes in procedures or rules or new offerings or whatever, doesn't always get out there. Now, with that said, of course, some people are saying, don't expect that this year. Although, while some economists are saying that, that's what's actually, I believe, one of the stories this morning saying that. We had Dr. Sajuan last week saying, election budget, expect it. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what is going to happen. However, I think election goodies will differ depending on who you are and what you want or think you need. One of the things that I don't expect to happen is to be able to get 5.8%. And this is just like an annual thing now where the THA, at least under the TPP, say they hope to get this amount of percentage of the national budget, and they get 4%. They hope for 6, they hope for 5, they hope for 5 point something, whatever. They get 4% or 4.2 or whatever the minimum is. Now, the one saving grace is when the Tobago Council, the PNM, was the THA majority party, they got more or less the same thing. So, can't necessarily say it's completely to politics, but rather it is with regards to the economic strategy of the administration, which is, say, control spending, which is why certain goodies probably ain't going to happen, but some will. That is to say, certain amounts of goodies and types of goodies that were utilized to placate the population for the last couple of years potentially should be coming down the pipe as well. Because the problem is, it's an election year, and even if you can't give people extra, you don't want to take away. That'll leave too much of a sour taste in people's mouth. Now, with that said, one of the things that I don't quite understand is certain things that were said in the previous budget, we're not entirely sure what came to pass of them, like the $100 million for the Defense Force. And I'll get to the Joint Task Force one in a second. That's a very interesting way to name an initiative, but anyway. Was that utilized for the current joint efforts? Which is kind of crazy because this initiative is now, and that $100 million was announced last year's budget. Well, last year's budget presentation. Basically a year ago, give or take, right? What about all of the money in general? One economist, I believe, is asking, well, exactly what was done with the money allocated to the ministries that got these large allocations, like education, health, or even national security? What was actually done beyond just the recurrent expenditures? We pay the salaries, we pay the light bill, hopefully. We pay the water bill, maybe. We pay maintenance on vehicles and the building itself. We maybe buy stationery and equipment. But was there anything, and economists asked us, was there anything with regards to capital expenditure for any sort of growth, any sort of investment to the future? And to some extent, some capital expenditure isn't even investment to the future. It is to replace assets that have so depreciated that it's no longer relevant. Case in point. Well, we'll get to that a little bit later. I do wonder how much people are going to be disappointed from this budget, that they're not going to get the goodies that they want. Because a lot of people have their hand out, which leads to the next story that I want to highlight, because there are a lot of various takes on national security and its budget allocation. So first off, and let's go straight into it, Minister in the Ministry of National Security, Keith Scotland, he's confident that for the sake of the country, crime is the main priority. Now, granted, it would be a hell of a thing for him to say this, and it's not proven to be true. But then, of course, there would be the semantics of how do you define priority? Because education and health got a significantly higher allocation in national security. I think by about $1 billion. Actually, no, I'm incorrect. About $500 million for health and about $1 billion for education. Still not entirely small. By prioritizing, does that mean that national security is going to get the largest share? Or is it going to be the only ministry that's going to get an increased share? That is to say, they're going to put more focus on it. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get more money. But it was the one ministry that were like, we need to put something extra into. Is that what's going to happen? I don't know, because when you look at the overall picture, there's one question. Well, before I get to that question, one of the things that it might need some extra is, we already have issues with our border security. There's another article, not going to enter it, that compared our situation with Jamaica. I would beg the question that Jamaica does not have a potential unstable neighbor that is essentially a thoroughfare for guns and drugs, particularly drugs, and illegal immigration, human trafficking, etc., etc. That is a pirogue ride away. You don't need no big cargo ship. You don't need no big yacht. You don't need a big vessel. You need a pirogue. One engine, and you're going across the water from Venezuela to Trinidad. and you could bring Lord only knows what with you. And national security would need probably a significantly larger, and it wasn't that small last year, it was 6.9 billion, a significantly larger allocation if we want to see the Coast Guard get back on its feet, rhetorically speaking, or rather to get back on its hulls, because literally speaking, there are questions about the seaworthiness of some of the hulls that are in the possession of the Coast Guard, right? Apparently, we supposed to have 12 vessels operational. Not all of them are actual deep, well, large vessels. Some are essentially the size of pirogues. Some are rubber rafts, inflatables. And then some are the Daemon vessels that were touted by the minister. Of course, the two vessels that came in as Minister Hines came in, we don't necessarily know what the status are of that, because the last we heard from the head of the Defense Force is that, well, they just can't get parts. And this is not the kind of mission where you just say, oh, well, we can't get equipment, so we're just not going to do the job until somehow management figures out how to. Head of the Defense Force is management. Minister of National Security is management. The cabinet, that's management. So I'm not going to put this, if that's the reason why all the boats are more or less out of service, I think there's something like one or two interceptors which are like, I think 40 foot or somewhere between 20 to 40 feet vessels, something similar to a pirogue. Something like the boat that was in Scarborough that sank of the Coast Guard years ago, I believe. Yeah, we might have one or two of those left and that might be it. Good luck. For all intents and purposes, we have to protect basically 360 degrees of our coastline, because some of it could get to Venezuela. It's not necessarily impossible. I don't know if we could afford to actually get the Coast Guard operational. That's where we've reached. The problem has grown so big that in order to try to get the genie back in the bottle, that is to say the made a bottle, because at 470, I guess you could say thankfully we only have 3 more months to go. Don't think we're going to get to 600 this year. Could be wrong. Could be wrong. But then there's another aspect to this. The unions, they're optimistic about their budget allocation. Like the minister, right? They're optimistic that, and the line is that they will get the resources that they need. That's what Gideon Dixon essentially said. Sufficient resources should be given to the two police officers given the critical role they play and the challenges they face. We recommend significant considerations to be given to the police to ensure its fundamental rights and safety and security are not compromised. The question is, I know that at times, former Commissioner Gary Griffith was able to highlight lack of funds without necessarily complaining and criticizing the government outright. In fact, there was the time when the Prime Minister complained, why didn't they need SUVs for? I don't understand. They have these SUVs and they drive them hard and, you know, flashing lights to go get lunch and blah, 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 blah. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know if he actually said that about using traffic lights to get lunch, but you kind of know that it is alleged that officers do it. And then I think after complaining about having to buy SUVs for the police, they ended up essentially kind of quietly, after this whole big, I guess you could say, outburst at the launch of the police Riverine Unit facility, I believe, quietly they go and they buy the SUVs anyway, if my memory serves correct. I could be wrong. I mean, then former Commissioner Griffith had at least a reasonable point. Don't know if this applies across the board or was so relevant that it completely overrid what the Prime Minister had to say, but I do believe it was at least relevant enough. Well, you know, one shift drives the car, pass it off, another shift drives the car, pass it off, a third shift drives the car, and then we get into the next day. So the potential wear and tear on some of these vehicles from official duties is already high, which makes the using the lights and sirens to speed through traffic when you're not necessarily responding to emergency even more egregious for all of those officers who do so. Just see. My thing is, if you need resources, why don't you say something? Because you did say the critical role that police officers play, the challenges that they face, are they not important? So it leads me to a question, to what extent is it just, because we know that teachers and doctors and people in offices for various ministries and state companies essentially have a gag order. In some cases, they are outright told, don't talk to the media, don't air your complaints in the public, don't expose the dirty laundry to the people. Now, to what extent are the unions, the police union, the fire service union, the prison service union, they're looking to play ball? To what extent is Gideon Dixon not wanting to upset the apple cart too much? Except, it's one thing about wage negotiations and all of that. This is something relevant, not just for the safety and security of the population, but also the safety and security of the members. I don't know if I've heard enough from you on this with regards to, is enough resources being allocated? For instance, with regards to give out traffic violation tickets, are enough resources being allocated just for that mundane basic function? And from what I understand, for a while now, the answer is no. And let's not forget, if they want to increase the number of police officers, that means that they need to increase the amount of equipment, generally speaking. One would assume that all of the trainees that were accepted into the academy at the start of the year, that was done to augment strength, not to maintain strength. Because then what was the point of making it such a big deal in last year's budget presentation? You said you're going to increase. Yes, I get it, we might not have the money, but unfortunately that doesn't change the fact that we need to have a certain amount of expenditure in national security to get the job done, and we're not seeing it. We're not seeing it with the Coast Guard. And apparently, when relevant, in limited capacities, union leaders of various unions of the protective services will say, well, we hope for a bigger allocation. This isn't, we hope for a bigger allocation so we can get a brand new wing in this police station that could be fully air conditioned with sleeping accommodations and new kitchens. We're talking about, I would imagine, protective equipment, electronics, maybe even firearms and ammunition. Let's not forget, there's a question with regards to how, because of court proceedings in the states that may have made it more difficult for firearm dealers to bring in ammunition, since they are technically the ones who are supposed to be doing it for the state, at least for some arms of the state, not all. To what extent do we have to question, are we going to have that as a problem as well? Thanks to our decision to go and join Mexico on a wild goose chase that wasn't going to get anywhere. We're just going to wait for budget day and say, I need more money to help police the nation. Where were you before? All right. There's more, but we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue. Stay tuned to Talking About on WSN. We'll be right back after this. Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
It is now you don't need to register nothing. You don't need. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploited the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm not to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of the
not no.
Let's go to the last part.
Joint Task Force 1, an initiative with regards to increasing the presence of national security personnel across several police divisions. It's an interesting naming convention, Joint Task Force 1. It's almost like if it seemed till 6, we didn't really know. We kind of wanted to have a very generic name to name this thing and not really describe what's going on. Because technically speaking, a task force is something that you put together, yes. But I don't know if a task force is something that you put together one task force and then they'll be operating, one would imagine, semi-independently in the various divisions, because the police organization does not have a federal level in TNT to some extent, right? I mean, granted, jurisdiction lines don't necessarily matter to that extent, but, Northern Division ain't fussing about what's going on in Southern Division, Tobago, etc., etc. Is it that they didn't want to reveal how many task force they're going to have, or this is supposed to be all one initiative? Why Joint Task Force 1? Usually when you have a number, it implies that we're counting multiples, whatever. The thing is, all of that fancy window dressing aside, it is joint police and army patrols. That's it. That's all. Right? Unless they give us more. Aim to increase the presence of law enforcement. This is not something new. Joint police and army patrols. This is not something new. And the effectiveness of this is a double-edged sword, because it's not as though we put a couple hundred army people out in a day and we have a couple hundred more law enforcement personnel, because they need to be accompanied by members of the TTPS, because while they do have powers of arrest on the basis that every citizen has powers of arrest as a citizen, citizen's arrest, they don't necessarily have the same police powers that police do. So things get murky unless you want to change important parts of the law, but then it gets even more murky, right? So it's not as though the army men could patrol and the police could patrol. You kind of have to pair them up. And it's not as though, it doesn't seem as though you pair one army to one police officer and you just say go. But rather you'll have a vehicle, instead of having multiple vehicles, you'll just have more people in the same number of vehicles. It won't necessarily give you a more effective, larger presence. You'll just have more bodies to throw at the situation. Ironically, if we don't have more vehicles, because how many of these guys want to do foot patrol, we're not going to see more patrols. Maybe, I mean, in the States, back when I went to New York to visit the old aunt, and of course we would be there for a few days, making the most of it. You know, of course, you're not taking a taxi everywhere, you're walking. And one of the things that I found interesting was at that time, and this was, I can't remember how long ago this was at this point, it seemed as though in certain areas in the core of Manhattan around Times Square, there were officers on the corner of like almost every corner. It did a lot to make you feel safe when you're like walking around, you don't know where you are. Foreign city, and there's officers who are courteous. I don't know if we have enough foot patrols around Port of Spain to really effectively alleviate the situation, but then again, where do we need the foot patrols? Maybe East Port of Spain and certain other hotspot areas. Certain areas of downtown, on the promenade maybe. Woodbrook maybe. Belmont, Laventille. The thing is, why don't we, instead of trying to get the army to do what the police does, because in part we're trying to expand the police, right? So the need for that is reduced. The police are there in the cities and the urban or suburban areas with the road networks, with their police vehicles, and they're patrolling among the civilian population who are going about the day by and large. Meanwhile, we have an army that supposedly trains to do things like field exercises, that potentially should be willing and capable of going into the rural parts of the country, whether motorized, that is to say with a truck, because we don't have armored personnel carriers, so we're not mechanized, and we don't necessarily have enough helicopters to be air assault. So, motorized. But then at some point, the roads are not going to always be convenient for where a military needs to go. So you have to have your guys learn how to travel by foot and navigate with personal devices. Back in the day, you didn't have electronic devices to do so. So if you need to tread where there is no cell phone reception, that should be fine. And the reason why I say that is, why don't we have army guys do what army guys should do, which is to say, we have a whole north coast that's difficult to monitor, right? In part, even if we had the Coast Guard up and running 100%, whatever you determine 100% should be, we still have a whole north coast, where every now and then they do find marijuana fields, where we could have illegal ports of entry. And then on top of that now, you have other parts of rural Trinidad, and maybe to some extent rural Tobago as well. Why can't we, I don't know, maybe get the army to patrol the bush? And you don't need to send a platoon out to do one hill. You take your infantry battalions, you break them down by companies, you break them down by platoons, then you break them down by squads. And you send a squad or two to patrol this area. You probably don't need to have the entire regiment out on patrol. Therefore, you could do cycles of deployments. Some are out, some are not. They could do field exercises, work on their field craft, as well as, I don't know, just monitor the coasts, monitor the mountain ranges, away from where people have built their houses, monitor the bush. You know, every now and then we find things in the bush. Maybe if we patrol the bush in a semi-regular or regular basis, we might find more things. Let the army do army things. Now, or is it that the army doesn't actually want to work? As much as the operations officer of the defense force seemingly is gung-ho, what tends to happen in our criminal justice system is that the higher-ups are all gung-ho and they sound like they are ready for this mission. We don't always see the buy-in from the boots on the ground. And literally, I think, we have a regiment. Maybe they should be on the ground. Not on the pavement. Because again, if we need more boots on the pavement, we should, as was done, continue with getting more police officers. Army personnel aren't trained necessarily to interact with the public. Ironically, you would still potentially need to send a police officer with these patrols that I don't know if anybody else has done it, but I am proposing. You still have a police officer or maybe a trained MP, military police, as part of these patrols, but you're only going to need one as somewhat of an expert embedded. It's almost like a translator or a forward air controller or a Navy corpsman embedded in certain units in the American military. Just have one, as opposed to, oh, well, we have 2 officers, 2 Army, 4 officers for Army. Because we have to hold their hand and chaperone them. We can't put them out there and unleash them on the public on their own. Well, we're going in the bush now. We're going in the bush, and then I don't know if maybe that's seen as cruel and unusual punishment for soldiers, but I thought people want to be soldiers to, soldier. In professional militaries around the world, a happy soldier is a soldier that gets to go out and do training and not just, do whatever nonsense in the barracks, farting around all day. The ones who actually want to do the job want to do the job. But then again, if you look at too many areas of public service, including national security, it seems as though there are not a lot of people who want to do the job. In fact, case in point, back to the Coast Guard for a second, apparently there won't be enough personnel to properly crew the vessels that we do have but are obsolete and their hulls might no longer be seaworthy, to go out on patrol, to man the ships. I don't know how it reached at that point, but I guess somebody figured, hey, the boat's breaking down, so let's just not have crew. I don't know. I don't understand. So this whole Joint Task Force 1, okay, cool, y'all are doing a thing. Y'all are doing a thing that was done before with a new name, and somehow we are going to see starkly improved results. I'm not going to buy it. Now, if you want to put people on every street corner, okay, fine. To some extent, we might have to put some soldiers there too, at least for now. But in the long run, you see, the Coast Guard should be patrolling the sea, and then the Army could patrol the land. But to some extent, there are people who know where these illegal ports of entries are. And if people in the communities know where they are, most likely there are police officers, soldiers, Coast Guard officers, etc., who know where they are. And yet somehow they go unabated. I wonder why. I wonder who benefits from not interdicting in a significant enough way what's being brought into the country. And the thing is, the benefits could be across the board, up and down the chain. And I'll leave it there. All right, let me go to the next story. Back on budget, and I do find this somewhat interesting. And just to be quick, Tobago fishermen, they are blaming the THA, I guess, for what's going on with crime against their equipment from being robbed. They may even look to pursue legal action from what is described as for money owed. The thing is, if I am a criminal enterprise that's smuggling things illegally, I don't know if I want fishermen to be out at sea to witness things. I don't always want to have to come in at night. And even then, maybe I just want to discourage the local fishermen in whatever area because there's things I want to do. I do wonder to some extent if the pirates on the water, are they necessarily there because they want to rob engines or because they want to get our fishermen out of the water? But it goes on about that with regards to, I don't think this is necessarily one issue that the fishermen have, but they have an overriding issue. Some of them were contracted to certain jobs and their salaries will be paid. They're blaming the THA for crime, even though to some extent the THA's authority over policing is limited. And their ability to affect the criminal justice system and law enforcement is limited. But I just found it interesting, you know. They're getting their stuff stolen. I do wonder if there's a greater motivation for it. I'll jump stories and we'll go to, we have an interesting situation. One that we should have seen coming. One that the government, the Minister of Energy tried to say, nah, that's not that bad. Because back in June, our courts, they recognized a legal situation, one involving a multinational corporation based in America, ConocoPhillips. It's an energy company. It's an energy company that apparently is owed by Venezuela $1.33 billion US dollars. And that claim that I believe originated in an American court, I believe in June, essentially they got like one of the first steps. It was recognized down here. And the Minister of Energy said, everything will be fine, don't worry about our dragon deal. And then now, last week, Justice C. Prasad basically said, yeah, they could seize payments stemming from, I believe, Dragon Gas and other well, at least for Dragon Gas, they could seize payments for that deal. That is to say, we would have negotiated with Venezuela. Eventually, one of the things that got us the deal was the fact that, okay, we'll pay you in cash, we won't be giving you goods or whatever. And now the court is saying, right, and this US firm could then now seize those payments because Venezuela is not cooperating with, I guess you could say, international law. You might debate me on that, on if they have a right or not or whatever. But generally speaking, Venezuela has done some questionable practices with regards to foreign assets and claiming them for the state. So then the question is, based on what's reported there, it could go after Venezuela's Dragon Gas money. And if Venezuela now is not going to actually receive $1.33 billion, maybe they might write it off. There might be so much money in this deal, they wouldn't care, right? Or maybe $1.33 billion might be a Maybe they might pull up. Maybe they might demand from us, you can't allow this to go on. The thing is, some people might say, hey, the Americans going after X. Well, when the plane was confiscated, it wasn't necessarily a government saying, hey, we need to find something to hit them with. Sometimes it is literally the machinery of the system just doing its thing, regardless of what the politicians want or don't want. And sometimes they do interfere and they quash it. Or sometimes it might be that, well, we won't interfere, we'll just let it happen because we want it to happen. And in this case now, it'll be very telling how our government tries to respond, because ultimately speaking, it's not as though our government wants to have Venezuela's compensation for the Dragon deal to be seized by an American corporation, multinational corporation. But the court and the legal system is technically independent of the government, for better or worse. And I mean, maybe we could debate whether it is for better or worse. But I guess if we want similar legal protections in foreign jurisdictions, we can't just make special exemptions whenever we feel like it. So what's going to happen? I haven't necessarily, this has made international news, by the way, but I haven't yet seen Venezuelans response to it. Maybe I didn't look deep enough. What's their response? Because Dragon isn't, running yet. The Dragon is still sleeping in its lair. But maybe the Venezuelan authorities are waiting to see, are they actually going to confiscate our money? It'll be real interesting if we actually go through this whole process and invest in the further infrastructure to get the gas to Hibiscus and then to us, and then the money to Venezuela gets seized by the courts because ConocoPhillips has these successive court orders. In fact, Venezuela might be banking on the fact that, look, you're all going to invest all this to get this done. Y'all better not take our money from us because we could. We have the right to say no. And then what? We'll sue them? I mean, that'll be an interesting turn of events if we have a basis to sue them in order to maintain our deal while paying off their debt with their money. Things will get really dicey if that happens. So we could see another threat to the Dragon. I do wonder if something will be said about this in the budget, because the budget is kind of like, how things went economically for the year, right? Maybe Minister of Finance might say something, because this has a direct impact on finance. Or maybe they'll kind of wait and see how they could wiggle their way out of it. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, he was at the UN speaking on various topics. Maybe the smart thing would be to wait for him to weigh in fully on this situation. I don't know if he's back yet or not. With that said, I think the Minister of Energy, he did his best. He did his best to try to say, this situation is not going to affect our Dragon deal. Here's the thing. People in my sphere, they say that politicians lie. And I try to push back against that. And this is one of those cases where if we want to debate semantics, did he lie per se, or was he just trying to spin the truth in a positive way to prevent panic? But at the end of the day, one could argue it's close enough to the sun that Icarus' wings were melted. It's practically like a lie, right? Even with good intentions. To what extent was this wishful thinking? To what extent was this pulling the wool over our eyes? To what extent was this trying to mama-guy us? I don't know. I mean, I get it, right? You can't necessarily say doom and gloom things, and to some extent, this budget, expect some amount of finessing of the language. But is that what we need right now? I mean, maybe we do need a little bit of panic. Maybe we do need a little bit of fear with regards to the economy, because it seems as though somehow a lot of people are lamenting, things are hard. Life is hard. Things are hard. I don't know how I can make out. And we have all of this stress and anxiety in our little bubble, but it does not translate to the population having a sense of agency, basically saying we demand something to get us out of this. That is not just the same old, that will never give us a different enough result to make a difference. So maybe we do need people to have a little bit of panic, a little bit of discomfort. Maybe we do need a hit to confidence, which might lead to a hit in the economy, but it might be a wake-up call to do something more. And I get it, the Minister of Energy is trying to prevent that, because in theory, generally speaking, you don't want that to happen. You don't want confidence in the economy to go so low, because then, like the Great Depression, it can have a snowball effect and make the damage worse. But given the fact that we like to just hold strain and we are under the assumption that God is a Trinity and something will work out, because something always works out, because nothing ever goes wrong here apparently, except, wait, the narrative of that is changing. If you were to tell people 40 years ago that we would have 500 murders a year, they would say, oh my God, how could it happen? It happens incrementally. It snuck up on us. It didn't go from 10 to 500. It went from 10 to 50 to 100 to 200 to 300 to 400 to 5, then to 6 2 years ago. And now it's almost like if we want to wave flags in celebration, oh, well, we might stay down at 5 this year. As though somehow that's a silver lining. Only 500 plus people are going to die this year to violence instead of 6 plus. Maybe we need an austerity budget. And there is a world where that's what we're going to get, and the PNM are like, yeah, we don't want to run the country right now. So, we're in a mess. The country's in a mess. Have at it, Kamala. You take this ball and roll with it and see what you can make of it. Good luck. We'll enjoy criticizing you from the opposition side of the bench for the next 5 years. And then when, the entire thing falls apart by about a year or two and falls right out underneath you, we'll come back in the next election and beat you and take things over when things may or may not have stabilized. Who knows? Who knows? Because ironically, they could do an austerity budget and then lose the election, and then UNC has to pick up the pieces. You change directions and then come back out of austerity after a year. All right, we take a break. We open up the phone lines. You can get your last bits of precognition into this budget before we actually hear it today at about 1:30 p.m. You could hear maybe, it might be futile now, this is the 11th hour, they're going to listen to you. I don't know. But you could still call in and have your say. When we come back, stay tuned.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next in stuff. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have 2 of the 3 species of anteaters right here.
On austerity budget or election goodies, what are we going to see? My money is on election goodies. With that said, first caller for the morning from Digger Martin. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Mr. Michael Small. Two quick points. They have normalized 600 murders. We're going to go past 600 murders this year. The statistics and the trend will show you that. So we no longer 500. 500 is a blessing in disguise if you can get the curve turning. But it will be about 630, 640. Now, the other thing is the police service, Marine Division, even though their performance is pathetic, it's better than the Coast Guard. For example, the Joint Select and the newspaper report, the Coast Guard within recent time has seized about 1 gun and hold about 2 people, whereas the police marine has gotten much more guns with the pirogue. So why not shut down the Coast Guard? Because you buy all those boats and they're not doing nothing. And give the police service more pirogues, as Fali said. But the more important thing, I want to touch on the leadership of the police, because we will not move this country. And I'm going to pong this issue. We give 2 former police commissioners Chaconia goal. For what? I want to know what is the criteria we use that. And I've said it. One of these commissioner of police was the police commissioner on the day. What he did to discipline, supposedly, was he aware that they're going to do that? Because if you look at the recent promotion, and saying again, a lot of the police who were involved in the day of policing became ACP, became superintendent. Now, during those promotions, there was a senior ex-policeman on a committee to basically interview these people. Was that person on that? Because there's a court matter with some people who didn't get promotion, indicating that he might have been biased in the interview process. The second person in 2001, 2002, the then police commissioner, Hilton Guy, appointed him together with 2 other senior policemen to go after voter padders. All of those voter padders did nothing. They were freed because the police lost the file. Now, come back to the police service. What the police service has done to discipline those errant policemen who seems to be elevating. You understand where I'm going for? Because those two instances was directly linked to election issues. The voter pardon is to intimidate people not to vote, and the day of policing was done during the day of a negotiation. The police service take a 4% now, you know, and they're very, very quiet. The senior people of the second division most likely going to be elevated somewhere when they retire to some board of thing. So what I am asking the police service now, where are you going to go with this election? Are you going to be unbiased, apolitical? Because it's senior petticoat from previous history. How come you only identify those two police commissioners? What about Hilton Guy? What about all of those before? You won't give them nothing? Because it appears from my vantage, you have a linkage with them and you are indebted for them for the alleged issues that is in sync with your objective. I'll go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. I mean, that's an interesting observation. I'd just like to add to that. You always bring up the total day of policing, of which there was no action taken. And again, you're right to say that, and here's why. We understand why the police wanted to do it. We might even, you know, empathize with their actions or agree with it to some degree. Some of us would, right? I don't necessarily agree with it, but some people might. Here's the thing. You don't want to necessarily punish the whole service. It's not practical. But you can't let something like that go without some sort of public punishment. Because unfortunately, optics, PR, it's a bad word, but it's also a necessary word. The public needed to see some sort of repercussion so that they would understand that there was some extent of accountability. And also, it needed to be public so that you can be certain that the members in the service know we ain't going to protect everybody from reprisals, right? We will take the people directly responsible and they will be dealt with. Because even if it's done for the right reasons, does not mean that you should not be held to any sort of accountability. That's one of the things that makes whistleblowing a very interesting question of ethics. Because sometimes you have to break the law to be a whistleblower. And if I was in that situation, I would not expect or demand for me to be shielded from the law if I have to essentially break the law. Extreme circumstances notwithstanding. We have San Fernando on the line. I have more to say, but San Fernando, first, good morning, caller, you on there.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Two things I want to comment on that you discussed this morning. One is last thing you talk about with Venezuela, and with ConocoPhillips and this court award by this Frank Sipasa decision, which as far as I'm concerned is really nonsense. Let me say this about this issue with Venezuela. The U.S., the Trinidad and Tobago government does not have to honor any decision like that. They don't have to. Let me just say that firstly. Secondly, between the U.S., France, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, and the U.K., they have seized over $8 billion of Venezuelan funds, right? Including the Bank of England, the award that the Privy Council said it was illegal, and they had to give Venezuela the $2 billion worth of gold, and they refused. There's money there. Why it is that ConocoPhillips has not been able to get money from those jurisdictions that have Venezuelan funds, actual money holding Venezuelan funds, okay? And put that into the mix, and you'll understand how why that decision, why ConocoPhillips has come here, because in those jurisdictions, the state has refused to give them the money. So we can do the same. That's one.
The state has refused, okay.
Yes. The second thing is this. That issue with the Tobago fishermen, right? it's a wider issue I have been looking at for a while, and I put a little more emphasis on it when this Hurricane Helen passed through Barbados. Well, passed close to Barbados and devastated some of the fishing fleet, the trawler fleet. And you know, I looked at that. For a little island like Barbados, Sean, Barbados, they had over 200 trawlers damaged. And these are not big trawlers, eh? These are trawlers that are a little slightly bigger than pirogues. But what has happened is Barbados has developed a proper fishing industry. With all the money we have had for decades, we have never developed a proper fishing industry in Trinidad and Tobago. And that's the bigger issue. In Tobago, there's only one trawler that is owned by the THA, the capital of Paradise. In Trinidad and Tobago, there's a trade there there's some training. I think it's two of them that do training in Chagaramas. We have not developed a proper fishing industry. And I would hope that Tobago could hear this and take a look at what is happening in Barbados and start to put some funds into developing a proper fishing industry for their fishermen. As I said, it's not a difficult thing, but some emphasis has to be placed on it, and some money has to be placed in it to develop a proper fishing industry. Barbados earns a lot of US dollars from that fishing industry that they have shown, and something that you could take a look at and understand what I'm speaking about. Have a good day.
Thank you, caller. Maybe part of it is a suppression. And I'll just leave it there. Who knows what interest might be had with regards to the crime against fishermen in TNT, right? Or just a lack of organization at the end of the day, as you're alluding to. But do we have a caller? Is it a new Savannah? Okay, I will say this though. It's one thing for England and other countries to deny America with similar claims. Our situation and their situation is different, right? First of all, we might want larger countries like America to offer us similar legal protections as what America is basically demanding of us. And then more importantly, we don't necessarily have to go all the way to sanctions, but our economy is kind of dependent on trade with America. So, like I said, our situation and the situation of, say, England is not quite the same. And I'll just leave that there as to why it might not be so easy for us to just say no. We have another San Fernando on the line. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Good morning, sir. I want to report something. I'm looking for Sean on the TV, but I'm not seeing him. I've seen somebody there, but they're not Sean. Right? And the second thing is, tell them for me, some years ago, that the farmers and the fellows who deal with beef in England, they carry up the price of beef by 1 penny. All the housewives stopped buying beef for a whole week, and the price went back down. But we never want to learn from that. We want to look at other things. Yeah? And one more one is, after November the 8th of next year, let me say the 9th, I will call an inquiry, and then I'm going to bring some foreign forensic experts to find out where we money gone. Because I know it's missing, I know. Why is it missing in China? They're going somewhere, maybe, I won't call anything, but I know it's gone. And thirdly, we have our own PDD down here. I feel like called Puff Daddy in Trinidad. You know that? Right, so thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. I mean, I'll say this. I won't be surprised. And I told someone that messaged me just one of the various tidbits of news that came out, right? Apparently, Diddy wanted to say that he bought all of his baby oil from Costco, and Costco immediately went to social media and said, we don't sell that baby oil here, so haha. I won't be surprised. It's this whole Diddy situation, if you don't know, there's a lot of allegations against him, particularly with regards to overly sexual acts and openly sexual acts at his parties, among other things, including things like sexual assault. I don't know if it goes all the way to rape. Maybe it does. There's a part of me that doesn't want to know. To some extent, a lot of jokes have come out of this, but there's that dichotomy of we're having entertainment at the expense of people who did probably go through some significant pain or suffering. To what extent, I'm not sure, because I'm not looking to know all the details, to be honest. I won't be surprised if it happens here, but to what extent, I don't know. There's a part of me that doesn't want to know. And I guess I'm glad that, unlike Marlon Wayans, I don't even have to say that I leave the parties early. I never go to those parties, so meh. And if it does happen, and like I said, I won't be surprised if it does. The question is, to what extent are we going to do something about it? Or can we do something about it? Because again, we're not like those bigger countries. The kind of stuff that you could get away with down here because of corruption is in some ways, not all, but in some ways a lot bigger or a lot more bold than what you could get away with up there. Maybe. Back to what Mr. Diego Martin said with regards to the accountability of the police leadership. I'll say this probably until the cows come home. Brent Thomas was essentially kidnapped based on the legal definition of English common law what kidnapping is, right? Because one cannot say he was legally detained and returned to his home country. Therefore, what else would you call it but kidnapping? Because he was unlawfully detained and returned to his home country, right? The person in charge of that operation, who, generally speaking, probably did get some sort of permission or authorization, whether official or unofficial. The police officer that led that expedition was promoted to DCP. And I'll just leave that there. We don't reward excellence, in part because I don't want to reward my subordinates for being excellent. I don't want excellent subordinates because then they'll show me up. So I will bring up the same waste of time people that I was, potentially. We don't want excellence here. We want the same old, same old. That's why it seems as though we reward the same old, because the same old is not a threat to our careers. That's one of the things. You see this in dictatorships, and maybe you're seeing it here too, but we're not a dictatorship, not right? Independent intelligence thinkers, sometimes those are nails that stick out too much and they have to get hammered back down. We have Diego Martin on the line. Good morning, caller. Caller, good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning. Apologies for coming back in, but a critical issue I wanted to raise here again.
Right.
On NOCO PDVSA judgment in Trinidad court. The Dragon deal with Trinidad has a contract. That contract must be disclosed now, because I think there's a yearly fee for the contract. I think it's $3 million US. We have to pay for that licenses agreement for the next 25 years. So I want to see the contract to see, in the event it is broken, if we have to pay something towards a broken contract. Because, as they say, anything going to the PDVSA and the Venezuelan government, ConocoPhillips could activate it like a garnishee order. And a garnishee order means that, hey, before you take anything, you have to give us what is due by the court. So that is the seriousness of that. The other thing I like to see in the budget, you remember we have somebody that's act on our behalf up in America. I think the fellow named Matt Collins, who does lobby for us. I wanted to know if that arrangement is still in there, because those are some serious issues with respect to a scarce commodity, US dollars. And if we are abusing it like that, and I won't even mention the Prime Minister overseas travel, but those two are, if it's $3 million every year, over a period of 25 years, is 75 million US. If you break the contract, if you had to pay all of that, you had to pay half of it. I want to know that because I find they have been silent since the judgment was made. I think it's Justice Supatad made the judgment. So that is what I wanted to bring to your attention. I go and have a nice morning.
Thank you. I'll say this. They've been silent, but it's not as though like it's long enough that we could say, oh, they're trying to avoid the issue completely. Yeah, they've been silent, but it'll take a few more days, generally speaking. Not everything they're going to speak now for now, and unfortunately, and I know and I can understand why the oil companies themselves, when they have NDAs, again, we don't want to necessarily break these things willy-nilly because then the rest of the industry will kind of look at us funny, right? Or you're going to break an NDA for them. You're going to break an NDA for us now? The thing is, don't want to discredit what Mr. San Fernando said in the sense of, yes, there might be some sort of lever for our government to block this. I just don't know what it would be, and I don't know how legal it would be. I mean, I guess, push come to shove, you could basically pass a law that says we won't allow for this to happen. But then again, it goes back to what I said. If we were in a situation where we wanted a foreign government to kind of uphold what we believe to be our rights, uphold a court judgment in our jurisdiction in theirs, if we kind of pull away from this, I don't know what the unintended consequences could be. But then again, maybe there are. Maybe this is par for the course with regards to international business, because international law is not actual law like what a national legislature will pass. International law is essentially just treaty. And there's no one to enforce treaty in that way, like how you have a police service. Interpol is not going to enforce international treaties. San Fernando back with us, I believe. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Yes, Sean. I call back to say this. I use Barbados as an example to you with the fishing industry because I follow the developments in the Caribbean islands because I have to, right?
Right.
And I pointed out Barbados in particular this morning, and I wanted to say this. I see let me say this: the Barbados government, and not the only this one with Miss Motley, previous governments, they seem to all have a plan, whether or not it differs in terms of the administration, to move Barbados out of small island developing states to a developed small island. That is their plan, and I think there are a lot of things going on in Barbados where they are trying to do this in terms of the sanitation system, in terms of the new technology for roads, a lot of stuff going on in Barbados, that little place. I listen, and I'm saying that to say this. I listened to the Prime Minister on Friday in the that function at Atlantic LNG, and the Prime Minister said, I'm not paraphrasing here, but he said, we're in for a rough couple of years. He said that to the population, you know. We're in for a rough couple of years, and
not the first time he said it.
To hold on.
Yeah.
This is the same Prime Minister that has been in the seat of government for 9 years, right? And is telling us we're for a rough couple of years to hold on. I was so upsetting to me, so upsetting to me to hear him say that. And it seems as if this Prime Minister, who is head of the government of Trinidad and Tobago for the last 9 years, seems to be on the opposite trajectory to Barbados. Like he wants to take us back into third world status. And I'm serious about that. This seems to be the plan, because there is no cohesion in the government to try and move Trinidad and Tobago forward, and as a whole, I'm not seeing it. I am not seeing it, and this is where we look at that budget that they're going to present what do you call it today,
this afternoon, yeah,
and And I bet you it's going to be another deficit budget.
Yeah,
You can't tell me that for 10 years we have had deficit budgets. So 10 years deficit budgets in this country. That is a strain. Those deficit budgets are a strain on the future of this country and the future of the people of this country. Because the money has to be paid back somehow. Because they're borrowing, and it has to be paid back. And I hope people see this and understand this and understand what they need to do. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. Yeah, deficit budgets. To wrap things up, you can have a deficit budget if you have enough growth to outpace the deficits. That's why Japan has a 200 debt to GDP ratio. GDP has to grow. If GDP grows, tax revenue grows, right? To some extent, it'll help deal with paying off the deficit, right? And then, yeah, to some extent, you also kind of defer the loans. But the problem is we're going to be racking up potentially more loans. Not just defer the payments, but add more loans on top of loans that we're already deferring without the growth. Without the growth, we're not Japan, we're not the US. We don't have the same sort of economic power that they have in order to basically run the budget with deficit spending. I think that model or way of thinking came out in 2008. I could be wrong, I could be mixing up things. Either before or after the whole economic collapse, where, you know, somebody in the IMF, and I think he just left the IMF, and he was saying, no, this is the new way to do things. And a lot of countries, if they weren't doing it already, they adopted it. But then COVID happened, and that put a wrench in nations like us, our plans. Look, Barbados, and I would argue also Jamaica, they're doing things for long-term development, right? Jamaica, they built a road. They're financing it with a toll. Also, a toll is a way to help control traffic congestion. Adding more roads, it has been shown, studies have shown, is not going to alleviate traffic congestion. We'll just get more people with cars on the road because we'll think, oh, the traffic won't be as bad. We're being outpaced, we're being lapped. Not because they have more resources, but potentially they're making better decisions. They have their own problems, they have their own challenges. But they were forced to deal with a more severe situation, with weaker cards in their hand, right? Playing the game. And because of that, hey, we are accustomed to always having face cards until recently. They're accustomed to always having Bush, and yet somehow they still have to win rounds for their nation. And they're doing it, and we're not. This administration, for the most part, has had no new good ideas. All of the legislation that passed are basically legacies of previous administrations. All of the legacy projects that we've seen, think about it. The new airport of Piarco, that's kind of needed, automatic is a given. The new airport in Tobago, not necessarily needed quite as soon, but to some extent at some point we'll need it anyway, fine. These are obvious things. The waterfront was not that obvious. The Cooper Children's Hospital is, at the end of the day, just another hospital. I think the PNM in this administration may be open 2. So I don't know to what extent, if that is a legacy project enough. It was a children's hospital, half the beds were for adults, whatever. Like, where are the new ideas for governance, for policy? Not just, oh, I need a legacy project to build. Because the thing with the waterfront was, it wasn't just, oh, we need to replace government offices because, you know, the old buildings are falling down. No, there was a policy shift behind it. That's why that legacy project goes a lot further than we'll just have a new airport. Just having a new airport literally is just replacing what we already have. But the waterfront was to get government functions out of private buildings and renting it for large amounts of money. That was the shift in policy. That was the investment to the future, not just having a new building, but also changing the way that government did business. And we don't have a lot of projects like that anymore. We have road extensions because we think we need to alleviate the sufferings of some people. Not having road extensions because we are looking to have an economic model to improve investment into the area, to improve economic mobility, to offer new opportunities for businesses to grow, for people to get jobs. I don't know if any of that is thought into what limited expansion we have in our road network. By the way, have you seen the east and southeast of the country? It's like you're going behind God's back times 2. And hopefully you don't drop into a pothole so big. I could use an expletive for it, but we're over time. There's no good ideas. They only know what to do in the past. That's why oil and gas is all they know. They don't know about tourism. They don't know about agriculture. They don't know about manufacturing. They don't know about growing the private sector for jobs to grow. They don't know about education. That's why education has all these problems. Because they could only follow what was done before. They're like someone who inherited a business and the business is falling apart because the environment has changed, the industry has changed, the consumers have changed. But all they know how to do is copy what Daddy did because he was successful then. But that was 1970, 1980, 1990. This is 2024. Times have changed. And hey, Daddy had a successful oil and gas business, but the wells are dry. We just magically not going to earn the same amount of revenue if we're depending on the same wells. But innovation, that shows up too many people, man. And they don't like that. Nah. It's better that you know your role, stay in your lane, shut your mouth, and let's just keep on keeping on. And if we don't experience the growth that we were supposed to experience, that's not our problem, because we'll die of old age before the consequences hit us. And then it'll be like what people want to complain about Eric Williams now. It don't matter. Anything we want to say that we disagreed with that Eric Williams did, that Robinson did, that Manning and Pandey did, it doesn't matter. We needed that sort of criticisms and insights when they were there to potentially change the course of their decisions if their decisions were bad. But doing it post-mortem, literally, is meaningless because we don't have the political will to apply that level of urgency in the current now. Well, at least Mr. San Fernando gets it, and hopefully the rest of us will as well. Probably too many young people, their heads are in the sand, and they ain't going to get it. So with that said, make today a good day, as Mr. Shah would always say. Thanks to all of the callers. Remember your allegiance to this republic, no matter what happens this afternoon. We still actually have to continue living in this country tomorrow morning. If you don't like what you're going to hear in this budget reading, I would advise you the only thing, the one solution that overrides all solutions, get more involved, but stay safe doing so. We'll see you tomorrow with our post-budget analysis. Bye-bye.
WESN.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward and our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the corresponding banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. I mean, and Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada in spite of the obvious difference in size.